I'm Jonathan Grimes. I'm here with the manager, Barry Curtis of Curtis and Son Funeral Home, and just going to do a short little interview and ask him a few questions. So, Barry, about how long have you been in the funeral profession?
About 40 years.
40 years. What sort of changes have you seen in the funeral profession over that time period?
There's been plenty as far as um, traditional events. We see um, a little less traditional services, visitations same day as services versus nights visitations prior. Technology that's playing a big part in customization. So
A lot of changes over
a
40
lot of
years.
changes, yes.
So, what about the changes in the apprenticeship training? I'm sure it's changed since the beginning of your career.
Well, it has. Years ago there wasn't the requirement of the 30 hours a week for the apprenticeship program. I think that's what it is. But we had some people back in the day that would, just come in on the weekends or whatever, and they could do their amount of calls or whatever for apprenticeship. But now that we're really working more now is having somebody like yourself come in and work full time and do apprenticeship versus just some part-time position. And I think it works out better that way.
Yeah. What about OSHA changes?
Well, OSHA made the changes back years ago that protected the employees, and now 20 plus years later, I'm assuming that's about it, that it's just a way of doing business. And with the pandemic coming along, that's one of the reasons why it wasn't a big adjustment for us at the funeral home, is because we have all these OSHA regulations that we're already, meeting that standard.
Now, you mentioned visitations earlier, so what about some details that you've seen changes in visitations and funerals?
Well, probably in the last 7 or 8 years, we see more same day visitations versus the night before. Now, we still have some traditional areas that want the night before visitations, but this really reverts back to kind of like the old timey line and stayed at the church. An hour before the service is a visitation period, and then the service. So that's pretty much the trend right now for us.
So, how do you feel about the distance learning that is kind of occurring, especially with the pandemic? What's your feelings with that as far as with the education side?
Well, I think all education's gone to virtual learning or online learning, distance learning. I think it's important for this type program because you got to make a living, and you don't have time just to, go 2 days out of school and not work and not have family time. So I think the distance learning is a needed thing.
Okay. So as far as funeral directors, what are some qualities that you look for in a funeral director?
Well, I think a good funeral director, is attention to details, because the families and the public expect, we charge a nice fee for what we do. They expect the big things to be done, and they really don't. The difference makers is when you pick up on the little things, the personalization, the making the families feel like they got your 100% of your attention.
Okay, so you've been in the business for 40 years. Is there a law or a guideline or anything along that lines that maybe you would put in place, maybe something to change a little aspect of the funeral business itself?
No, I don't know about the law. Requirements for what it would take to give the personalization. You know, you have funeral directors that just run in there and they're there for the last 15 minutes before the visitation's over and the service starts. You know, the lead director and the second director that's on the funeral, I think they ought to spend at least an hour with that public on that day of service.
So you would say make that a requirement instead of, right now it's kind of an option.
It should be a staff requirement. I don't know that you ever could make that a law, but a good
certainly a guideline.
a good funeral home should have that guideline that the number 1 and 2 directors should be on the floor out there with the public for a good hour.
Okay. Now, of course, I'm going to be dual licensed. So, what's your feelings of dual license versus single license?
Well, if I had my preference, I would prefer everybody to be dual licensed, but that's unrealistic. Number 1 is some people do not have the capacity to go to school to do the curriculum to become dual licensed, and we need funeral directors. That's important. We need funeral directors as much as we need embalmers. So I would prefer young dual licensed employees, but that's not all you gotta have. So there's a place for both.
Okay. All right. So my last question is, looking at the apprenticeship training, is there anything that you would change to the way the training is going on today?
Well, it's according to what you want the apprenticeship program to do. If the apprenticeship program is to make you capable of day 1 after licensing to be a dual licensed funeral director and embalmer, you need to do more on the public side during your apprenticeships. Y'all are all coming out day 1 as embalmers. You've had the experience. You know what to do, and you're capable. But you will not be capable to be the lead funeral director and an arranger at day 1. And so I would say that more training in the arrangement lead funeral director.
Balance it out a little bit more.
A little bit more. It seems to be when somebody's dual license, you're focused on, well, they're a licensed embalmer. Dual license, nobody says, wow, they're a licensed funeral director. You're not ready day 1. You won't be ready day 1 to be the lead arranger or the lead funeral director. You will be day 1 a lead embalmer. So I say there's a gap there.
Okay. Well, Barry, I thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to allow me to ask you a few questions.
Glad to do it.
Thank